All right. Good morning, gentlemen. If you've got your Bible with you, open it up to Leviticus. I know that scares you, but open it up to Leviticus chapter 20, and you'll understand where we're going this morning. But before we begin, I want to read a passage to you that's going to fit in well with what we're going to look at this morning. It's from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. This is a reference Paul's making to the Israelites under the cloud, being that cloud of fire or cloud of smoke that led them during the day, cloud of fire at night. He says, they were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, the crossing over the Red Sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. In other words, baptized under his leadership as he led them. They all ate the same spiritual food, manna, quail that they were able to catch. All drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, this is where it's important. Now, these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. We must not indulge in sexual immorality as some of them did. Verse 11, now these things happened to them as an example. He says it again. They were written down for our instruction. So he's writing to New Testament believers. We're included in that category. This is written for us as well. So all these things he's talking about that happened to the Israelites, which we've been looking at for the last weeks, are written for our instruction. Then he says, therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. And it's interesting that he starts out that chapter with that information. And it's going to fit in with what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to continue our journey through the names of God. And we're going to discover that this week, this particular topic is one we all need to hear. Now, we need to hear all of them. All these names are important, but I think this is probably the most significant name of God of all of them, besides just Jehovah itself, the great I am. This is going to be a hyphenated name, Jehovah something, that we're going to look at in just a second, that's going to connect with what Paul wrote to the Corinthians. And this idea of idolatry, this idea of holiness, this idea of living differently than the world around us, and the Israelites didn't do a very good job at it. So this morning, as we talk about this, we're still talking about God, right? We're trying to get to know God by understanding the names of God that either he gave to himself or the people of Israel gave to him. And there's a whole bunch of them. We've worked our way through about 4 or 5 of them now. And we looked last week at this particular one that Mitchell unpacked, and it's Jehovah Nissi, the Lord is our banner. You got to remember in verse 7 of that chapter, what happened was the people of Israel said, is God even with us or not? Are you here or are you not here? They didn't like what was going on, and so they complained about the very presence of God. And then what happened next was the Amalekites. They attack them, and then they have to fight against the Amalekites. They have worse things than lack of water, lack of bread. It's now potential death at the hands of a formidable enemy. And so God sends Moses up on the mountaintop. He holds the banner, the staff of God up, and as long as he holds it up, they defeat the enemy. If he drops his hands and the staff lowers, which symbolizes the presence of God, they are defeated, and yet he prevails. With the help of Aaron and Hur, he prevails. And so that's where we get this idea that the Lord is our banner. He's always there with us. He's always providing for us. He's powerful. He's the great I am. I'm present, I'm powerful, I'm capable, and I will rescue, and he did. So this week, we're going to take it further, and we're going to fast forward even further into the history of the people of Israel, as we'll see in just a second, and we're going to look at this, the Lord your sanctifier. I think most of us, if you've been in the church very long, are very familiar with that word sanctifies, sanctification. We know what it is, and it's to grow in Christ's likeness is how most of us would define it, that we are to be sanctified. We're to become more like Christ with each passing day. The problem is, how well are we doing at it? How well are we being sanctified? And so it's interesting that in this book, Leviticus, and the theme of Leviticus is all about holiness, the holiness of God, the holiness of God's people. And we're going to find out that in the middle of it, in chapter 20, God's going to come up with this name that declaring himself to be the Lord, our sanctifier, the one who sanctifies. It's Jehovah-M'Keddesh. Now, this name has kind of driven me crazy because I've wrestled with where did this come from? I know the root of it, and we'll look at it in just a second, but it comes from a word that's not spelled anything like this. And a lot of these names of God that we see have been English-sized. I don't even know how to say it. They've been turned into English words that don't fit the Hebrew. But what I've really wrestled with is why does it have this M? It sounds like a Scottish name, right? Jehovah-M'Keddesh, no, it's what is this? So I went to Eve Salcedo, who's on our staff, who has a PhD in Hebrew, and I said, where did this come from? And he goes, I have no idea. Oh, well, that helps a lot. And he goes, I think what's going on here is it's been kind of made English so that we can understand it. But he goes, I do know what the M is for. And the M is there for emphasis. It's really there to add weight to the name. He's in Hebrew, if there's an M before any name or any word, it's there for emphasis. And so he is the Lord who always sanctifies. He's faithful to sanctify. And we're going to see it comes up in Leviticus chapter 20. Now, if you've ever read Leviticus, and I know you've probably tried to read Leviticus if you've ever done a one-year reading plan, and Leviticus is one of those books you get to and go, why am I doing this? Why is this book even in the Bible? Because it's full of all kinds of things about adultery, bestiality, homosexuality, bodily discharges. It's an incredibly difficult book to read and a really hard book to apply. And yet it's in God's word for a reason. It's all about holiness. It's all about how God is holy and how he expects his people to be holy. So here's what it says in verses 7 and 8. Consecrate yourselves, and we'll unpack that. Therefore, so he tells them to do something. These are the people of God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy. This is very similar to something Paul said to us, or Peter said to us. Peter said, be holy because the Lord your God is holy, right? I've always hated that verse because it sounds impossible. I can't be holy like God, but there it is. Be holy as I am holy. It's what I heard my mom say when I was growing up. And I know every one of you guys heard your mom say this. At some point she'd say, why can't you be X? Why can't you be good? Why can't you be more obedient? Why can't you be like your sister? Why can't you be? And it's her way of saying, you're not what I want you to be. And when I hear be holy, that's what I hear. Why can't you be holy? Why can't you be what I want you to be? Why are you anything but holy? And it sounds very defeating, right? But it shouldn't be. See, he says, consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. I am the great I am. I'm Jehovah, your God, Elohim, the creator of heaven and earth. So, because of that, keep my statutes. Do them. Obey me. I want you to be holy because I am the Lord. Again, Yahweh, Jehovah. I am the great I am, and I've chosen you, and I'm the one who sanctifies you. These verses are hard, no matter how you look at them. And when you look at them in the context of the people of Israel, we're going to find out that they didn't do a very good job of obeying this command, consecrating themselves, being holy. And it's kind of the story of their lives. And I can read it and say, well, you morons, you idiots, why can't you do what God tells you to do? But I struggle with the same things at times. Being holy, living like I'm called to live. So what's the context here? We've gone from the early days of the Israelites when they fought against the Amalekites, when they were not long after their exit from Egypt, and now we fast forwarded and we're 40 years later. It's somewhere around 40 years, okay? This is after their wilderness wandering, after they had gotten to the land, didn't cross over because it was full of giants, and God let them wander for 40 years in the wilderness. So this is after that time. So a lot of time has gone by. Elohim has appeared on Mount Sinai. Remember, when God called Moses, he met with him on Mount Sinai in the form of a burning bush, and he says, you're going to come back here one day with the people of Israel. This is that point. God has brought him back. He's delivered the people of Israel. They've arrived at Mount Sinai, and what happens on Mount Sinai is he gives him the law, right? And that's what Leviticus is all about, the law of God, the commandments of God. And he's also given them the sacrificial system. Why is that important? Because nobody can keep the law. He knows they're not going to keep the law, and so he gives them the sacrificial system to provide them with forgiveness, atonement, so they could get back in a right relationship when they screwed up because they couldn't keep the law. This is what God has done for them, and he gave them the plans for the tabernacle, and they built the tabernacle. So the tabernacle's in existence, and because the tabernacle sits in the middle of the camp, and it's portable, and they move it everywhere they go, God is always with them. He's always present, right smack dab in the middle of the camp, because his Shekinah glory exists in the middle of the Holy of Holies, above the mercy seat, on top of the Ark of the Covenant. So Jehovah, Yahweh, the great I am, dwells in the midst of his people. And that's important to remember, because as we look at this chapter in Leviticus, these people have all of this going for them. They have the law. They have the presence of God. They've got the sacrificial system. They have everything they need to stay in a right relationship with God. And yet we're going to find out that they have a really hard time doing it. But what does God say? I sanctify you. I am the Lord, Jehovah, who sanctifies you. And that word in Hebrew is Kaddash. It's where we get Kadesh. And then you put an M on it and it becomes M'Keddesh. It simply means set apart. Whenever you see holy in the Bible, 9 times out of 10, it's the idea of you have been set apart. Something has been set apart. We see it when you study the tabernacle, when God gives them the plans for the tabernacle, and he says, I want you to do this and I want you to do that. He talks about all these utensils and all these pieces of furniture, and all of them are set apart. Set apart for what? For him. Set apart for the tabernacle. There's dishes, there's bowls, there's basins that are used in the tabernacle that have been set apart for God. They are for his use and his use only. If you were a priest in the tabernacle and your wife was having a party that night and said, hey, would you get one of the basins from the tabernacle so we can serve punch? You would not do that, because it would desecrate and profane that set apart vessel. It's not that it's any special vessel. It's no better than any other vessel. It means it belongs to God and you are not to use it for anything else. That's key. Set apart, consecrated, made sacred. Made sacred, why? Because it belongs to God and we're to regard it as sacred. And that's what God is telling these people is, I sanctify you. I have set you apart. Look at this in chapter 2 of Genesis. Here's what God says. So God, Elohim, blessed the seventh day, made it holy, Kaddash, there's that word, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. This is one of the first times we see this word used in this context. God set apart a day. What day? Well, in their case, it would have been probably a Saturday. That was their Sabbath. In our case, we celebrate the Sabbath on a Sunday. But he made this day special. He made it holy. He set it apart. And they knew it was set apart. He told them it was set apart. So he sets aside one day from all the rest. On 6 other days you can work. On this day you don't work, because it's reserved for me, for my glory. 24-hour days, just like any other 24-hour day. And this is something I think we all have to kind of get into our heads, that when we hear holy, we think of something unachievable. It's out there, it's in the distance, we can't get it. It's what maybe somebody else is, but I can't be. No, when he says it's holy, it just means that it's not any better, it's not any different than any other day, it just is reserved for him. Hadn't changed in the least. That day has not changed. It's still just one 24-hour segment of time, but for God, it's holy, it belongs to him. And this idea of belonging to God is huge. That day is his day. That's why you don't use that day for what you want to use that day for. It's not set aside for you. It's not made for your rest. It's his day. Jesus said, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. It's his Sabbath day, not the disciples' Sabbath day. And it's for his glory alone. Now, if that's true of the Sabbath, it's going to be true of everything that God declares to be set apart, holy, consecrated. And it's going to be true of the tabernacle. It's going to be true of the people of Israel. When he says, you have been sanctified, he's saying, you, Israelites, belong to me. You are mine. Look at this in chapter 13 of Exodus. The Lord, Jehovah, said to Moses, consecrate Kadash, there's the word again, to me, all the firstborn, whatever is first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and beast, is what? Mine. It's mine. Now we could spend weeks talking about what the significance of that is, but it simply needs to be understood that God is saying the firstborn belong to me. That they are mine. Dedicate them to me. There's this idea of ownership, and we need to understand that if we're going to understand what it means to be set apart by God. Deuteronomy 7:6, you, Israelites, are a people, holy, kadosh. That's the adjective form of the same word, to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you. That's key, right? He's chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. This is something we blow past when we study the Old Testament and we look at the Israelites, that God specifically chose this people. And when we think of God choosing anybody or anything, we think there's got to be some value. They got to bring something to the occasion, because otherwise, why would God choose them? But think about the disciples. If you've ever read the Gospels, you've got to sit there and go, why did he choose these men? And the answer is, I have no idea. I wouldn't make him a deacon. I wouldn't make him an elder. I probably wouldn't make him a table shepherd. I would not have chosen these men. And yet, Jesus Christ chose these men, not because of who they were, but because he chose them, just like here, to be a people for his treasured possession. God made that decision. And the psalmist talks about this. Praise the Lord, for the Lord is good. Sing to his name. Jehovah, the great I am, for it is pleasant. His name is pleasant. Why is it pleasant? For the Lord has chosen Jacob for himself, Israel as his own possession. Now, Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, and he had his name changed to what? Israel. He's the father of the Israelites. And it says, God chose Israel as his own possession. Guys, I've read the Old Testament. I've read the history of Israel. And I do read the history of Israel, and I go, why would you choose these moronic people? Why would you choose a people who don't seem to give a rip about what you think, what you believe, what you command? They're always breaking your commandments. Why would you do that? Because that's how God works. I don't understand the ways of God, right? Neither do you. But God chose these people. And as we saw in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, everything that happens to them is for us, a lesson for us, an example for us. Don't follow their example. Don't do as they did. But we do have to understand they were his own possession, his treasured possession, just like we are. So Exodus 19, therefore, because you are, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession. Now, what do we see here? It's conditional. We don't like conditional statements. I will do this for you if, I don't like that statement. I just want to hear the first part. I will do this for you. Great, do it. But if it's got a condition attached to it, it gets dicey, right? What if I don't do it? What if I don't do it the way you want it done? And this is exactly what's going on here. He says, you are my own possession, but you've got to obey my voice. You've got to keep my covenant. And if you do, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. Remember, he's already said, I've chosen you from out of all the people on the earth, Philistines, Amorites, Amalekites, Perizzites. Pick your eye. You are different than all the rest because you're my only chosen possession. But you got to live like it. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. See, all these passages, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Exodus, they're trying to tell the people of Israel, they're all, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all written by Moses, all delivered to the people of Israel, so they might understand that you are to be a holy, set-apart nation. You're not to be like the rest of the nations. You're to be different, right? And we know that, and we know they didn't live up to it. They didn't carry it off. They weren't successful. See, one of the things I think we miss is that when you're set apart by God, you're supposed to stand out. You're supposed to look different. You know, most of us are good at being kind of undercover Christians. The people we work with may not have a clue that we have a relationship with Jesus Christ because we never talk about him. And they may not see the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. So they don't have any clue that we're any different. We look just like them. We act like them, think like them, talk like them. And yet what he says to the people of Israel is that, no, you need to stand out. You need to appear different. Different. But they weren't different, right? He says, consecrate yourself. I've set you apart, but they don't live set apart. They aren't set apart. They're no different. They're no better than all the other nations on the planet, right? And yet, he's going to say over and over again in the book of Leviticus, be holy as I am holy. Stand out. Be different. And here's what we know about them. Just like we know about us, none of us earned our standing as his chosen possession. They certainly didn't. They hadn't done anything to make God choose them. And it's going to be really clear. God chose them, not because of them, but really in spite of them. And here's a really interesting thing about the Israelites, and we've studied this before when we did the book of Exodus. They were created by God, literally created by God. You remember the story of Abraham back in Genesis, right? Chapter 12, he calls this man, who's not a Jew, because the Jews don't exist, he calls him out of Ur of the Chaldees, which is somewhere over in Mesopotamia. So he's a pagan who worships pagan gods, false Elohims. He calls them and says, come, I'm going to make of you a great nation. This is what he says. Leave your native country, Ur of the Chaldees, your relatives, your father's family, in other words, your clan, your pagan clan, go to the land that I will show you, Canaan, and I will make you into a great nation. This is what God said to Abram when he called him back in Genesis chapter 12. And here's what happens over time. Jacob's going to come along, who's the grandson of Abram. And God's going to say the same thing to him. He says, I am God, Elohim, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. So what we have here is that Abram gets called out of Ur. He ends up in Canaan. He's going to have a son who then has his own son, who's this guy named Jacob. And there's going to come a point in time where there's a famine in the land of Canaan, and he's got to leave with his family. He's got to go to where? Egypt. We're not going to go through this whole story, but here's what's really interesting. What did God say to Abram? I'm going to make of you a great nation. Here's how he did it. It says in Genesis 46, when Jacob is getting ready to leave the famine in Canaan behind and go to Egypt, it says the total number of Jacob's direct descendants who went with him to Egypt, not counting his sons' wives, was 66. In addition, Joseph had 2 sons who were born in Egypt. So altogether, there were 70 members of Jacob's family in the land of Egypt. That is not a mighty nation, right? That's not even a big family to speak of. Heck, I get 46 people at my house on Christmas. And so this is not a nation. This is just a clan. This is an extended family. And yet, what does God say? I'm going to make of you a great nation. So at this point, that hadn't happened. And yet, what happens while they're in Egypt? God does this miracle of multiplication. He's going to take 70 and turn it into probably 1.5 million or more over a 4-century period of time. Now, you may think that's not a miracle. It's just natural. No, this is a God-ordained event. That God made these people prolific. They flourished. Here's what we see in Exodus chapter 1. The people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong so that the land was filled with them. They bred like rabbits. They're everywhere. And why is that important? Because that's going to compel Pharaoh to go, whoa, wait. These people are too many in number. And if they decide to side with one of our enemies, they could overthrow us. And so that's when he begins the persecution of the people of Israel. Isn't it interesting that God sent them there, 70 in number, he multiplies them, and it results in their persecution. But that's exactly what God told Abram was going to happen. He says, your descendants will be mighty in number. They'll live in a land where they will be persecuted for 400 years, and then I'll rescue them. All part of God's plan. The land is filled with them. And it says, when they left, when all the 10 plagues have happened, Passover has happened, and when they leave, here's what it says. It says, there were about 600,000 men, plus all the women and children. A rabble of non-Israelites went with them, and others otherwise Gentile pagans, along with great flocks and herds and livestock. Now, you've heard me say multiple times, 1.5 million Jews were part of the Exodus. How do we get there? Well, you take 600,000 men, let's say half of them are married, and then you say, okay, of those married families, there's an average of 2 kids, which would have been low for most Israelites. So let's say each had 2 kids. Do the math, and it comes out to about 1.5 million. And then you throw in however many were in the rabble that went with them, it could be as high as 2 million. But let's just say 1.5 million Jews left. That's a pretty incredible increase from 70. And God did it. God provided it. God rescued them. It says, the Lord did not set his heart on you, though, because you were more numerous than the other nations. This is interesting to me, right? How many were there when they went into Egypt? 70. So God didn't redeem them because they were mighty in number. He made them mighty in number. He created a nation. He didn't just choose them, he made them. They were the result of God's work. He says, you were the smallest of all nations. Rather, it was simply that the Lord loves you and he was keeping the oath he had sworn to your ancestors. So why is all this important? If we're going to understand what it means to be set apart, sanctified, holy, we got to understand the context here. Because what did Paul say to the Corinthians? It's all here for an example, a lesson, that we might understand that we too have been set apart. So what does it say here in Leviticus? He says, consecrate yourselves, therefore be holy, for I am the Lord your God. Keep my statutes, do them. Why? Because I am the Lord who sanctifies you. There's a lot going on in these verses that we have to get our head around, because God is saying, I have set you apart. I have chosen you. Not only have I chosen you, I created you. I took you from one man and his barren wife, and I've made a nation of 1.5 million people, and I've redeemed you out of what? Slavery. And I set you free. But he says, consecrate yourself. Same word, Kaddash. Set yourself apart. That's what he's telling you to do. I've set you apart. Now you set yourself apart. And part of me wants to go, why do I need to do anything? You've already done it. I'm already a treasured possession. What more do I need? And he's going, well, because you are my treasured possession, because I have made you, created you, set you apart, I want you to live like it. I want you to model it in your life. You know, every one of you have had kids or you've got grandkids, and you want them to live a certain way, right? You want them to honor Christ. You want them to honor the family name. You have expectations of them. Well, so does God. He says, I've set you apart. You're my treasured possession. And he's basically saying, now live like it. See, the Leviticus passage conveys God's expectation that the Israelites live in keeping with their status as his special treasure. This has hammered me all week as I've thought about it and as I've studied it, that do I live with the idea that I am his treasured possession and that everything I do reflects back on his goodness, his greatness, his holiness? Do I live that way? Do I wake up in the morning with that on my mind? Their behavior was to match their identity as his chosen ones. They're already holy, right? He says, I have set you apart. I have sanctified you because God picked them. God chose them. God created them. Now he's just saying, now live like it. Live like who you are. Go out and be different. Don't look like the world's around you. Don't live like they live. And he's going to make that explicitly clear in chapter 20 in the first verses. In other words, I've chosen you. I've made you my treasured possession. I set you apart for a reason. I need you to live like it so you don't look like everybody else. So you don't look like the Amalekites, the Amorites, and the Philistines, and the Canaanites. I need you to look like who you are. Live like you're my treasured possession. So that when other people see, they go, there's something different about you. You don't live like I live. You don't react the way I react. You love differently than I love. You respond to trials and difficulties in a way that I don't understand. See, what he's saying is that I want you to obey my laws. The whole book of Leviticus is all about the law and obedience to it. So obey my law. I want you to keep my will, not your will, my will. And you can apply any of these to your own life, right? That's what makes this hard. Obey my law, keep my will, and then do it with gratitude. Gratitude for what? His mercy and grace that he chose you. He chose you when you didn't deserve to be chosen. There's nothing about you, there's nothing about me that God looked at and went, man, I'm going to save that one because he is sharp. No, when he saved me, I was screwed up. And later on in my life, after I was saved, I got even more screwed up, and yet he never let go of me. I was still his treasured possession. I was still set apart. I was still holy in his eyes, even though I didn't live like I was holy. See, that's what makes this so incredible, is that he's never taken his eyes off the people of Israel, despite everything that they've done. They're still his treasured possession to this very day, and they were to reflect his holiness. See, that's what's significant about this, is those people, as stubborn, as dumb, as ignorant as they may appear to us, they were like us. They're the 1.0 version of God's treasured possession. They were the ones who were to live like salt and light in a dark world. They were to mirror the holiness of God. How do they do that? By their set apartness. I've been set apart by God, and this is what it looks like. That's all the law is, guys, is this is how you're to live. Now, he knew they couldn't do it. That's why he gave them the sacrificial system. But it was his code of conduct. See, listen to this. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel or of the strangers who sojourn in Israel who gives any of his children to Moloch shall surely be put to death. Now, what's going on here? These are the opening verses of chapter 20 of Leviticus. Remember, we read 7 and 8. Consecrate yourselves, because I have sanctified you. Set yourself apart, because I've set yourself apart. But it opens up with this. Why is he talking about anyone who gives his children to Moloch? Now, Moloch was a false god, and it was a god of the Canaanites, and it was a god that they sacrificed their children to. Why would you sacrifice your child to a false god? Well, first of all, you didn't know it was false. You wouldn't be doing it if you thought it was false. You thought it was real, and you expected something in return. You don't give your child away without expecting something in return. That's a pretty bold move, right? And yet, what he's saying is, don't do what the Canaanites do. Why would God have to tell the Israelites not to do this? Because they were prone to do it. They were prone to live like the nations living in the land of Canaan. And so he says, don't do it. If any of you gives your child to Moloch, you'll surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. The people of what land? The people of Israel. God's chosen people are not allowed to let a person like this, who worships a false god to such a degree that he's willing to sacrifice his child, that person isn't allowed in your midst. He goes on. He says, I myself, God, will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given one of his children to Moloch to make my sanctuary unclean and to profane my holy name. He's basically saying, if you go do that, if you go sacrifice your child, the worst thing anybody could do, give your child to a false god, you are expecting from that false god something you should only get by sacrifice in the tabernacle, giving proper sacrifices to the one true God. But no, you're going to give your child to a false god. And he said, if you do that, I'm going to cut you off. I'm literally going to kill you. That's how God thinks about the way the people living in the land of Canaan are living. He's not pleased with it. And he doesn't want the people of Israel, who've not yet gone in, to mirror their ways. He goes on, he says, if the people of the land, the Israelites, do at all close their eyes to that man when he gives one of his children to Moloch, in other words, they turn a blind eye and go, well, I didn't notice. I'm not going to deal with that. That's between him and God. Who am I to judge? If you do that, he says, if you don't put him to death, then I will set my face against that man and against his clan, and I will cut them off from among their people, him and all who follow him in whoring after Moloch. This is really kind of serious stuff, right? We look at it and go, well, gosh, good thing we don't do that. And we may not do it in those terms, but we do sacrifice our kids to false gods in so many ways. When we make much of our career, when we make much out of money, and we don't really pour into our kids the things they need poured into them. See, he says, if a person turns to mediums and necromancers, whoring after them, I'll set my face against that person and cut him off from among his people. What is he doing? He's talking about child sacrifice. He's talking about witchcraft, mediums, necromancy, talking with the dead. And I look at that and go, well, good grief, I've never done any of that. But what is he saying? He's saying that's the way the people in the land that you're going into, that's how they live, and you better not mirror, mimic, and model yourself after their ways. That's what, again, the book of Leviticus is all about. I am holy. I've given you my holy set apart law, my code of conduct. Don't go whoring after them. Don't model them. Don't give yourself to them. And here's where the rubber meets the road, guys. We live in a land where children are being sacrificed every day through abortion, through the trans agenda, being sacrificed to the culture, being left to just turn into whatever the culture wants them to be. And we don't really seem to be bothered by it. And he wanted the Israelites to be bothered by it. He says, don't whore after them. Don't become like them. And it's all about identity, affinity, and fidelity. This is why this passage is so important, why this name of God is so important, because he is the sanctifier. He sets us apart so that we might live set apart. Identity, what does that mean? They belong to him. You belong to him. I belong to him. And I need to live with that in mind. What do I mean by affinity? God loves them. How much does he love them? He chose them. He made them a nation. How much does he love me? He sent his son to die for me. While I was yet a sinner, Christ died for me. That's how much he loves you. There's an affinity there that we don't fully appreciate, but there's also this idea of fidelity. Because he's done those things, I should remain faithful. I should want to reflect my identity, that affinity. I'm loved by him, and I'm going to love him in return, and I'm going to show it through my fidelity. It's interesting that this idea of whoring that's used here, pretty graphic term, right? In the Hebrew, it just simply means to commit adultery. It's to play the harlot. It's to go after something other than what you should go after. It's used all the time by God of the people of Israel, that he calls them adulterers because they keep walking away from him, their one true love, and giving their affections to something or someone else. And we do it too, right? I don't have to explain how we do it. You know how you do it. I do it. It's easy to do because there are so many things that are appealing to us, so many things that seem like they can give us what we're looking for, but God says, no, it's me. I'm the one who chose you. I'm the one who made you. I'm the one who created you. You're my treasured possession, and I need you to understand who you are and live like who you are through faithfulness. That's why he says, I am the Lord. I am the Lord Jehovah, your God. Me. I'm not just any Elohim, I'm your God. That phrase appears 37 times in 9 chapters of the book of Leviticus. Why so many times? Because I think God's trying to tell them something, right? I am your God. I'm not just any Elohim. I'm not Moloch. I'm not asking you to kill your kids for me. I am the God who chose you, who set you apart, and has great things in store for you, but I need you to live according to our covenant relationship. I need you to live as who you've called out to be. You're bound to me. You belong to me. You're not free to live like who you want to live like. You're not free to mimic the ways of the Canaanites, the Philistines. There's a covenant, an agreement that's been made. This goes all the way back to chapter 17 of Genesis when God makes this covenant with Abraham. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, hasn't done it yet, doesn't have a son yet. He says, I will make you into nations. Kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations. For how long a covenant? Everlasting, unbreakable, unending. And what's cool about God is that he keeps us into the bargain, right? We're the ones who tend to break the covenant. But God refuses to break the covenant. He says, I will be a God to you and your offspring after you. See, this is what it's all about. The covenant is, I have sealed an agreement with you and I will keep my end of the bargain. I will be your God, which means because I'm your God, and because I'm holy, and because I have expectations, and I've given you my law, and I've told you if you break my law, I will punish you, he will. Why? Because he loves them, and because he knows what they need. He says, I'll take you to be my people. I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. See, we can say, well, why did God let them, experience a famine? Why did God let them move into Egypt? Why did God do this? Why did God let them suffer? Why did God let them? You know what? God knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing in their lives. He knows what he's doing in your life. And there are so many things that happen in your life and my life that we go, why? Why now? Why me? Why not him? Why not her? I don't need this. This can't be godly. This can't be good. And God goes, no, it really is. Because I am sanctifying you. I am preparing you for something bigger than you can understand. You are my people, and I do with my people exactly what I need to do with my people so that they might live like my people. Listen to this. The Israelites had a difficult time living up to their holy identity, just like you and me. According to God, they were holy, but they found it virtually impossible to maintain the standard God had given them. They couldn't keep the law. Over the centuries, they repeatedly failed to obey God's law, choosing instead to compromise their convictions and blend in with the nations around them, right? Well, I don't do that. Maybe you do. I don't do that. No, I blend in all the time. It's so easy to do. This did not make them any less holy or set apart in God's eyes. That's huge to me, right? I can screw up royally, and I do. I can say things, do things, look at things, go places I shouldn't go, and I do those things, and I am no less set apart than I was before I started it. I'm no less holy in God's eyes, and that's huge. Just because I do those things doesn't make me less holy. In fact, it causes God to punish them for bringing shame and dishonor to his name. They ended up in captivity again, this time in Assyrian Babylon. That's the story of the Israelites, right? I've given you my law. I've told you what you're supposed to do. Don't live like the people in the land. They go into the land. They live just like the people in the land. They sacrifice their kids. They worship false gods, and it goes all the way through the reign of Solomon and beyond. And yet God still loves them. He still sees them as holy. You're still my treasured possession. And then he punishes them because you're not living as who you need to be. You're not holy. You're holy in the sense that I've set you apart, but you're not living up to that identity. You're not living up to that standard. See, here's the deal with God. He's got great expectations. What are they? You shall be holy. And that may scare you, that may bother you, that may intimidate you, but when God says you should be something, he's not telling you something you can't do. That's impossible. He's saying, this is my expectation. You shall be holy because I'm holy. Live out your identity. Did God ever expect them to do it perfectly? No. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given them the sacrificial system, right? He would have said, do it. You didn't do it. You're out. But no, what he did is he said, this is my code of conduct. This is my expectation. Live like this. They couldn't. That's why he said, here's a way to receive atonement. Here's a way to have your life made right with me. But he did expect them to live set apart lives, right? Live differently. You shall keep my statutes, my rules. Do none of these abominations that are being done by people in the land, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For the people of the land who were before you did all these abominations, so the land became unclean. That word unclean is all over the book of Leviticus, along with the word clean. He says, lest the land vomit you out when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. See, what God's going to do is he's going to replace the Canaanites and the Philistines and all those ites living in the land who do these abominations. He's going to replace them with the Israelites. But when he replaces them, he says, you need to live differently. What's the problem? They didn't. They just kept up the same things that the people of the land did. The land vomited them out. God kicked them out, the Canaanites. But what God says, if you do what they do, if you live like they live, the same thing's going to happen to you. You shall therefore keep all my statutes, all of my rules, and do them, that the land where I'm bringing you to live may not vomit you out. And you shall not walk in the customs of the nation that I'm driving out before you. For they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. See, we live in a world, guys, where it's so easy to mimic what they do, want what they want, desire the same things they desire. And many of those things are fine and good. But if we're not careful, we begin to take on their attributes, their way of thinking, their way of worshiping something other than God. And God goes, no, I want you to shine. I want you to be salt. I want you to be light in the midst of all this darkness. And you do it by what? Keeping my statutes. That's why repeatedly in the book of Leviticus, I'm not encouraging you to go back and read it because it's a tough read, but I ran through it this last week. And over again, he says this: follow my rules, keep my statutes, walk in them, keep my statutes, keep my rules. Repeatedly, over and over again. He says it in chapter 19, you shall keep my statutes. You shall observe all my statutes and all my rules and do them. Why does he repeat it? Because he knows they need to keep hearing it. You know, I'm working my way right now through the commands of Christ, and I'm blown away by how many commands there are. And why am I doing that? Because Jesus told his disciples, go and make disciples of all the nations, teaching them all that I commanded you. So I've just been going back through the Gospels and what did he command? And there's a whole lot of stuff. And guess what? He expects us to keep it, obey it. If you love me, what did Jesus say? Keep my commandments. Do as I say, do as I did, live like I live, love like I love, serve as I serve. See, here's the rub. Sanctification requires your participation. I wish that wasn't true. I wish I didn't have to do anything, but I do. And so do you. See, here's what's significant. Elohim had set them apart, right? I have sanctified you. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. Great, good. But then stand out. Live like it. Let everybody know that I've set you apart. And the only way to do it is by living the way I've called you to live. Live up to this code of conduct. See, one of the things we have to understand is that when they did live up to it, they were carrying out the will of God. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't commit adultery. And Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount just ups the ante. He said, well, if you've even looked at a woman with lust in your eyes, you've committed adultery. Don't do these things, because when you do those things, you're not living set apart. You're not standing out. You're not carrying out my will. And I want you to live up to my covenant. Live out the covenant. You said you would. They signed the covenant on the dotted line. They said, we will do all that God has said. And they failed time and time again. See, we're to stand out. We're to carry it out. We're to live it out, just like they were. And when we do, it reveals that I am different. I am set apart. I have a holy identity that nobody else on this planet has. I love this. Look, I now teach you these decrees and regulations, just as the Lord my God commanded you, so that you may obey them in the land you're about to enter and occupy. Obey them completely, not partially, not based on what you want to do, feel like doing. That one doesn't apply to me. You will display your wisdom. This is so significant. Listen to what he says. When you obey God's holy commands, you will display your wisdom and intelligence among the surrounding nations. That sounds like it doesn't fit. Like when I live holy, I think I'm going to get lambasted. I'm going to be made fun of. You really believe that garbage? But he says if we live according to God's law, we'll display our wisdom and intelligence to the surrounding nations. When they hear all these decrees, they will exclaim, how wise and prudent are the people of this great nation? For what great nation has a God? Elohim is near to them as the Lord our God is near to us whenever we call on him. See, when we live out our faith, it makes people go, what's up with that? They seem to have joy I don't have. They seem to have contentment. They seem to know what they're doing. They seem to be wiser than I am. He says, what great nation has decrees and regulations as righteous and fair as this body of instructions that I'm giving you today? They're righteous, they're fair, they're good, they're gracious, they're given by God, they're holy, so obey them. Do them. He's not saying be perfect. He's not saying you're going to always keep all of them, but may it be your wish, your desire to every morning get up and say, Lord, I want to serve you, obey you. I want to live as who you've made me because you're the Lord who sanctifies me. You've set me apart. I don't know why you set me apart. I don't know why you chose me, but you did. Now I want to live like it. And that's what he's telling the Israelites. And here's what they needed to understand. It's going to be a lifelong journey of sanctification. It doesn't happen like that. It doesn't happen overnight. Sanctification is his job, but guess what? I get to participate. See, here's what I get out of this, that I have been sanctified, right? You have been sanctified if you're in Christ. You've been set apart. It's a past tense. I'm becoming sanctified, right? As you are becoming sanctified, I am increasingly becoming more like Christ. Some days faster than others, some days slower than others. And that's the calling out. He's calling me out every day to live as who I am. And I can say no or I can say yes. But ultimately, here's the coolest thing. I'm going to one day be fully sanctified. I'm going to be made clean. I'm going to be made new. And the same thing is going to be true of the Israelites. I have set you apart. I need you to live set apart. And one day I'm going to completely set you apart, where you will be what I've called you to be. See, their identity has never changed. To this day, the Israelites are still set apart. They'll always be set apart by God. You will always be set apart by God. Here's where we struggle, though, is our identity. What's my identity? Do I live like I'm set apart? Do I stand out like I'm set apart? Or do I blend in with the nations around me, the people around me? But here's the coolest thing about God. No matter what happens in the middle, I've been set apart. One day I'm going to be completely set apart, made holy. In this middle, this gap that I'm living in, no matter how much I screw it up, I never screw up my eternity. And the same thing's true of Israel. God will step in. And I love this passage. Therefore, give the people of Israel this message from the sovereign Lord. I'm bringing you back, not because you deserve it. I'm doing it to protect my holy name, on which you brought shame while you were scattered among the nations. This is written for the people of Israel when they're living in exile, when they've been cast out of the land. The land has vomited them out, and they're now living in Babylon. And what does God says? I will show how holy my great name is, the name on which you brought shame among the nations. When I reveal my holiness through you before their very eyes, says the sovereign Lord, then the nations will know that I am the Lord. And here's where it gets really exciting. Listen to what he says. I will gather you up from all the nations and bring you home again to your land. Then I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. Your filth will be washed away, and you will no longer worship idols. Has this happened yet? No. Are the people of Israel back in the land? Yes. Do they worship idols? Yes. Are they worshiping Yahweh, the one true God? No. It's a secular nation for the most part. This is yet to happen, but it's going to happen. Listen to all these things he says. I will give you a new heart. I will put a new spirit in you. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. I will put my spirit in you so that you will follow my decrees and be careful to obey all my regulations. What does God do in the end for the people of Israel? What they couldn't do for themselves. I set you apart. I've called you to be set apart. You don't live like it, but one day I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to do all these things, wash away your filth. I'm going to give you a new heart. I'm going to give you a new spirit. I'm going to put my spirit in you. So for once in your lives, you're going to be able to live as who you are, sons and daughters of God, heirs of the kingdom. And I love this. Paul picks up on this in Thessalonians. We had always to give thanks to God for you, brothers, beloved by the Lord, because God chose you as the first fruits to be saved through sanctification by the Spirit, being set apart by the Spirit every day of your lives, and belief in the truth. To this he called you through our gospel so that you may what? Obtain the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. See, it's all about the future. One day our sanctification process will be complete. We will be made holy. And I love this as we wrap this up. We fast forward all the way to the book of Revelation. John says, I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. God's going to come dwell on earth with us, with the people of Israel, with the people who have placed their faith in Jesus Christ. He will dwell with them. They will be his people. God himself will be with them as their God. Then he says, I'm going to wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, crying, pain, for the former things have passed away. No more sin, no more sorrow, no more struggle with temptation, because you will be as you're meant to be, because the Lord sanctifies. The Lord finishes what he begins. You've been sanctified, set apart. You're being sanctified right here and now, and you don't like that process any more than I do. And one day you will be completely sanctified, glorified, made to be like Christ. John says, beloved, we are now at this moment children of God. And what we will be has not yet been revealed. In other words, I don't know exactly what I'm going to look like in the future, but I do know this. We know that when Christ appears, we will be like him. may not understand sanctification. You may not even like the process of sanctification, but guys, it's God's will for you, and God will finish what he began. So here's your questions. Why is standing out the hardest part of being set apart by God, and what makes it so difficult? I love that I'm set apart. I just don't like the standing out part. I don't like standing out in the crowd. I don't like having to live out my faith. Why is it so hard? Does the thought that Jehovah is the one who sanctifies provide you with any comfort or sense of relief? And why should it? Does the idea that he started the process, he's going to finish, bring you any peace? Or do you just get all muddled down with, gosh, I got to be more holy. I got to do this. I got to do that. No, you need to trust that he is doing in you what needs to be done. You just need to listen to the Spirit. You need to be in the Word. I love the fact that you're here. That's all part of the process. Then finally, why is it important to remember our sanctification is a process that has a beginning, a middle, and an end? Do you understand? Do you hope in the fact that one day he'll make it all complete and you will be as you were meant to be, holy and like Christ? Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for these guys. And I pray that as they talk around the tables that these concepts would make sense, that Father, just like the Israelites, we have been set apart. We belong to you. We're your treasured possession, but we don't often live like it. Would you show us that that's still your expectation? You want us to stand out from the crowd. You want us to live differently. You want us to bear the image of Christ every day of our lives. And while we're not perfect at it, and you've given your Holy Spirit to help us in that process, may it become more and more important to us, because one day we will be like Christ and you'll complete the process. So Father, thank you for these men. Thank you for the time we have to talk. And I pray all of this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.